Let's talk about friendship, right? Because friendship there's very fascinating things
French
that can be
chips.
learnt over here. French chips. Well, that's blending together the cultures of America and England, right? Because we call them chips and you call them French fries. So let's talk about French chips, which is probably the closest that you're going to get to friendship, I think. The kind of relationship that you have with your French fries is something which is akin to the deepest, most meaningful relationships that human beings have with each other, actually. There are three different words that are used for friendship inside of the Bible. One of them is yedid. The second one is T-H-A-T. You want it in English or Hebrew? Yedid. Yud Dalad, Yud Dalad. I'll just tell you the words and then I'll explain them. There's a second form of friendship, which is a chaver, which is chet, bet, reish. And there's a third form of friendship, which is re'eh, which is reish ayin. Now, what do they represent? So each one represents a different dimension of friendship. Each one is something significant, but they go up in order of they get more and more significant as you go along. So yedid, like the word is spelt yad yad. Yud dalad yad yad, which means that there's certain friendships that you have when you are in contact with the person, you're very friendly. You get on just great together, which means it's a level of friendship. It's very good. Don't misunderstand me. There's nothing wrong with this, but it's a certain kind of a friendship which requires your being together in order for the friendship to be able to exist. Right? So when you're apart from each other, the friendship is not there. When you come together again, it reestablishes itself. Right? So for example, you may have friendships if you live out of town, right? And whenever you go home, there are people there that you don't have any real contact with them whilst you're not together with them. But when you're there, you have a great time together. You enjoy being in each other's company. That would be a yedid. A chaver is something deeper. A chaver comes from the word chibor, which means to be attached. You want to attach one thing to another. Lit chaber, to attach one thing to another. Chibor is something where you feel attached to that person even when you're not together. Right? So for example, you may have friends back home that you feel, you're very, very connected to. You don't see them very often because you're here and they're there, but there's still that sense of friendship, right? You feel connected with each other, even though you don't have any physical connection right now. And then there is a third form of friendship, which is an even deeper form of friendship, which is something called re'ut. Re'ut is...
Responsibility.
Responsibility?
Yeah.
Gosh. Don't like using words like that.
Scary.
That takes me back to my childhood. I can't do it. No, re'ut is I don't even know how to translate it into I don't know, maybe a soulmate perhaps. The concept of re'ut is a friendship which is so incredibly deep that you have connected together with somebody in the ultimate fashion. So for example, the Gemara says, V'ahavta l'reyecha kamoicha, that you should love your fellow man like yourself, which is a simple translation. Ask the Gemara, who is re'echa, who is your fellow man? And the Gemara says, HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The relationship that you have with HaKadosh Baruch Hu is one which is all-encompassing. Maybe that's the best way to describe it, an all-encompassing relationship. It's interesting that your spouse is called a Raya. Right? It's the same thing, coming from the same word, which means that the idea of connecting together with another person, normally the person you will be closest to is your wife, for the good and for the bad, right? Which means that she knows you better than anyone else will know you, right? So, when you come home, whatever, at 3 o'clock in the morning, stinking of alcohol with lipstick all over your collar, and you tell her that you were at a siyum,
a fabring.
Yeah, that actually then it could possibly be. Maybe it was, but whatever. Your wife knows you very well, right? She knows you inside and out. That's the connection that exists between spouses is something which transcends the physical. It's more than that. It's very rare to find re'ut amongst people who are not married to each other, although it is possible. For example, David and Jonathan, right? That's one of the friendships that's described as being a friendship that was beyond everything. That's considered to be a friendship of re'ut. I once heard from my Rabbi said like this, that why is it called re'ut? Because it comes from the lashon likroa, to tear. Your heart is something. Your heart is something whole. Right? In order to let somebody into your heart, you have to tear it open, right? So re'ah, likra, to let somebody into the innermost recesses of your heart, right? How did we get onto that? Because you asked, there's a very famous piyut, a very famous zemer that's sung on Shabbat called Yedid Nefesh. Right, so in some shuls they sing it on Friday nights. In some lots of places it's sung as one of the standard songs that are sung at Sudah Shlishit, at the third meal, right? And if you stop and think about it for a minute, it's an interesting description. Yedid Nefesh, your soul is your Yedid. What did we say the Yedid is what? Here, but again, rather than say your soul is your friend, what does the word Yedid represent?
Friendship.
This is all a little disturbing. I know that it was at least 2.5 minutes ago, but surely somebody must remember this. Contact, right? Yedid nefesh. There's something very deep inside of the words itself, which means that your soul and your body don't really belong to each other. They really don't. We're talking about disparate concepts. Your soul is something completely spiritual. Your body is something completely physical. More than that, the soul requires the body in order to be able to exist over here in the physical world. If the body wasn't there, the soul would go back up to the spiritual realms.
Then you're going to say that only on Shabbos they can interlink with each other.
No, but it's an interesting thing. Yeah, it's an interesting idea, though, that Yedid Nefesh, you would imagine that the way to describe the relationship between your soul and yourself maybe would be the deepest level of Re'ut, that's something which permeates your very being. But really, what the Zemer is coming to teach us is what? That your soul and your body don't really belong to each other. It's a Yedid Nefesh. The whole time that the soul is within the body, the contact is there, and you have a partnership, right? But when it's no longer within the body, then the two are broken apart, and there's no connection anymore. Yeah.
Does that mean, I'm not sure I understand that. Does that mean that in a failed marriage, there was failure to attain
Re'ut, yeah.
Could you say that?
Yeah, I think that makes perfect sense. I'll tell you more than that, actually. I think, thinking about it, I think it's conceivable that it's possible to reach a level of Re'ut and then for that level to dissipate, which means that marriage is not something you don't get there and then that's it, you've made it. And now, you get there, whatever, in year number 5 of your marriage, and then you don't have to do anything again for the rest of your lives together because, you've hit that level of re'ut, right? It's something which needs to be worked upon, which means I think it is conceivable that a person can connect together with a spouse on a level of re'ut, and possibly afterwards that level can lessen and lessen until at some point the couple decide that they can't remain together anymore. And at that point, then the whole thing is.
example that you gave, where he was like, I think dancing. He was in such euphoric.
Yeah.
Is that what you're referring to?
I don't know.
Relationship where.
I don't know. It's interesting. By David HaMelech, if you had to describe one relationship that he had with one of his wives as being Re'ut, it would be Bathsheba. Bathsheba, who gave birth to King Solomon, right? And it wouldn't be Michal. Which means obviously they have a connection over there. There's a connection? If I would say like this: if the connection was as deep as Re'ut, then there's no way that she would have been able to critique what he was doing, because she would have realized that he was doing it only to bring honor to God. Right? The fact that she critiqued him for what he was doing is an indication that she didn't, that she wasn't tapped in. They weren't tapped into each other to the extent where they understood each other properly.
Okay, because she suffered for that. I mean, she
didn't have children afterwards.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Michal.
Michal. Yeah.
But she was also awarded something. I don't remember what, on the Schuza or something. I don't know. Maybe.
I have a funny feeling. Palti ben Laish, King Saul, gave, even though she was married or betrothed anyway to David, right? When things started unraveling between King David and King Saul gave her in marriage to somebody called Palti ben Laish. Palti ben Laish was an incredible tzaddik, and even though they lived together as man and wife, they never actually had any relations together, because he stuck a sword in between the two beds, and he said that's it. You can't cross over. That's it. Nothing can be done. And both of them were rewarded with the most incredible rewards for not succumbing to temptation. They were married for a while together. I mean, they were living as man and wife together for a while, which means it wasn't just something which happened, one day and then it got taken care of, but it took place over quite a long period of time. There's a very famous idea from Rav Chaim Shmulevitz, the late Rosh Hashiva in the Mir, who says like this, a very, very interesting idea. He says, so Palti ben Laish, when in a fit of righteousness, he took this sword and he stuck it in between the beds, and he says that, no one can cross over. You can't cross over to my side, I can't cross over to your side. So he said in the same way that he stuck the sword in, he could pick it out again, no? Whatever, weeks later, months later, when he starts becoming weaker, then, emotionally weaker, then maybe at that point, so fine, just the same way you stuck it in the ground, take it out again. What's the big deal? And he said that the strength of Palti ben Laish was that every time he saw that sword, he relived he relived that sense of justice, that this is what needs to be done. Which means any time that he felt himself weakening, he just had to look at that sword, and he felt again that same sense of this is the right thing to do. And Rav Chaim Shmulevitz says that it's difficult. We take upon ourselves. We're no different from Palti ben Laish. We have different nisyonis, different tests that we have to overcome. And he says we're no different from Palti ben Laish. We make a Kabbalah on ourselves. We make a commitment to ourselves that we're not going to do X or we're not going to do Y or whatever it is, right? How do you live by that commitment? Right? When you become weak and all of a sudden you want to do it again, how do you live? By reliving the moment when you made that commitment. When you relive that moment, then all of a sudden you're strengthened again, right? So, a person wants to, keep things easy. A person wants to go on diet, and he doesn't want to eat chocolate cake, and he's overcome with the most incredible desire to eat chocolate cake, right? But if you just for a moment relive that when you took upon yourself to want to lose weight, then at that point you can overcome the desire to do it. And it's true, in Baruch Hashem, all these people, everyone's sort of taking upon themselves bits and pieces of what to keep. Within Judaism, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that, and maybe I'm going to start keeping kosher, maybe I'm going to start keeping this, keeping that. It's not always easy, it doesn't always go smoothly. And sometimes, when a person takes upon themselves to keep kosher, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden they've now erased all the pleasurable exposures that they had to delicious non-kosher food. So there are going to be moments when a person's you're going to have to strengthen your resolve. It's going to be a little bit difficult, right? to walk past that restaurant, or it's going to be a little bit difficult to walk past your favorite bakery or whatever it is because it's not kosher. And if that's the case, that's the idea, that when a person takes upon that commitment, that they should be able to relive that experience and to be able to strengthen themselves again.
I just when something like that happens for me, if I'm doing something and just without even thinking, I do something, and then I realize I just made a mistake, right? I just slipped up. I actually, I don't know how, but I get a good feeling simply because I realized I made the mistake, or that I acknowledge having overlooked it.
That's very good.
It's like,
That's very good. I tell you something. It's an interesting thing. We're human beings. Again, looking around the room, it's maybe not quite so apparent, but we are. You know what? I should speak for myself. Whatever. We are human beings. Of course, we're going to make it. Of course, we're going to make mistakes. King Solomon said that there's, he writes a posuk, he writes a verse. The verse goes that there's no such thing as a tzaddik that won't sin. Shelo yechta. Ain't tzaddik shelo yechta. Sometimes something like that. There's no such thing as a tzaddik who doesn't sin.
The tzaddik falls down 7 times and gets up.
Oh, so over there, King Solomon says something. He says that Shevi Yipol tzaddik v'kam, that a tzaddik falls over 7 times and he gets up. And on that posuk, Rav Hutner, the very famous Rav Hutner, was one of the greatest Jewish philosophers from the previous generation. Rav Hutner writes over there something very, very sharp. He writes that the fools think that the fellow got up because he was a tzaddik. But that's a mistake. He became a tzaddik because he got up. Which is the beauty of Judaism is, nobody's asking you to be infallible. Right? That's ridiculous, because we're all fallible and we're all going to make mistakes. The question over here in Judaism, the question is not, am I going to make a mistake? The question is, how am I going to deal with it once I've made it? Which means that you get up and you say, fine, you know what, I made a mistake, I've got to be more careful now, and I'm going to strengthen myself in certain areas to make sure that this doesn't happen again. That's great, right? It means that ultimately you've learnt from that weakness, from that moment of weakness, you've learnt from it. However, after having given that impassioned display of it's okay to trip up, and the problem over here is not tripping up, the problem over here is how you deal with yourself after you trip up. There is a very famous Kotzker, the Kotzker Rebbe, who was famous for his very sharp, very pithy comments that were always like, sometimes he looked at the world back to front, completely different to everybody else. So everybody says that feeling guilty about something is good, right? If a person does something wrong, and now you feel bad about the fact that you've done something wrong, that's a good sign, because that means that you'll do something about it. The Kotzker Rebbe says no. The Kotzker Rebbe says very often, guilt is the Yetzer Hara's way of making you feel that what you did wasn't so bad. Right? Because you did something you shouldn't have done, and then you say, and now you're guilty that you've done it, and then you say, oh, the fact that I feel guilty, well, that's a good sign. That means I've still got my sensitivity, and then you don't deal with the problem. So it's a Kotzker Rebbe. You've got to be very careful, because guilt comes in two different dimensions. There's positive guilt and negative guilt. Negative guilt is when I do something wrong and I feel bad about it. That's negative guilt, because being a youngest child, it's ridiculous that I should feel any kind of guilt about anything that I do. But negative guilt is anything that you do that stops you from moving forwards. Right? Very often a person does something and now they're like stuck in that place, and they can't get out of it. Their mum is just stuck in a rut of their own making, and can sometimes take a very, very long time. That's negative guilt. That's got nothing. There's nothing positive about that at all. On the other hand, there's positive guilt, which is I felt bad about what I did, and because I feel bad, that's going to be my stepping stone to get me to try to rectify that particular issue and to work harder to become stronger in trying to overcome it for the next time. Anyway, so guilt. There's 2 different kinds of guilt. There's somebody asked something about Shabbos. Say something.
What is unicorns?
Unicorns. Actually, unicorns are fascinating things. The unicorns exist. So, according to some opinions, there was an animal that skin was used as a covering for the Mishkan, for the tabernacle, called a Tarshish. According to the description in the Medrash, the Tarshish was what's called a Chad Karni. It had one horn in the middle of its forehead, and it was a multicolored. It was a multicolored. Had a multicolored hide to it, and it looked like a horse, which means that unicorn. It's quite fascinating. It really is. You know, unicorns are these kinds of things that appear in Disney. They appear in go back into sort of like into mythology, into various different cultures. You'll come across unicorns. What's fascinating is that their origins presumably occur inside of Judaism. It was an animal that was according to most opinions, it was an animal which was created only in order to be able to use its hide for the covering on the Mishkan of the tabernacle, and after that it's never been seen again. Right, it's gone. However, if my memory serves me correct, the Tiferet Yisrael, one of the most classic commentaries on the Mishnah, the Tiferet Yisrael is of the opinion that a giraffe could have been the Tarshish. Now, if you know anything about giraffes, so you'll know that they've got a knob in the center of their head, right in the center of their forehead. There's a knob over there, like a knobbly bit, which could or could not have been at some point in time, could or could not have been a horn of some kind. It also has a very beautiful hide, right? Its skin is very beautiful, and when it says so, according to Tiferet Yisrael, when it says that the unicorn was that the Tarshish was an animal that was brought only in order to use its hide to cover the Mishkan, the Tiferet Yisrael explains that it was not indigenous to that area at all. It didn't live in the desert. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought it only at that point to the desert in order to be able to use its hide, in order to be able to cover the Mishkan with. But it's something which could live in different areas, right? You know, they live in giraffes live in
Africa.
Africa, thank you. I knew it was one of those complicated words. Giraffes live in Africa. And, could it be that just for that moment in time, HaKadosh Baruch Hu brought giraffes over to be able to use their hides to cover the Mishkan with? For sure it's possible. What's that got to do with Shabbos? What is a unicorn got to do with Shabbos?
Shabbos is the unicorn of the week.
It's very possible. Giraffes are kosher, by the way. It's not yet. I mean, not for anything else, as far as I know. But you can't get married to a giraffe. But you can eat a giraffe. The reason why we don't eat giraffe, it's got nothing to do with not knowing where to slaughter the giraffe, right? Shechita. I mean, that's ridiculous. It's got a neck which is like 3 meters long. You know, how complicated can it be to find the right place to be able to slaughter it? The true reason why giraffes are not eaten is because their meat would be prohibitively expensive. It would be, hundreds and hundreds of dollars per kilo, but it's not. It's got a cloven hoof, and it chews the cud and fulfills the criteria for being a kosher animal. But we don't eat them. Do you imagine what kind of a soup you could make if you put a giraffe's neck in the? You wouldn't have a pot big enough, but that would be a pretty serious soup if you ask me. No?
Maybe we should go to safari.
No, we should ask Rabbi Geffen to make a field trip. After he's taken us to a bakery to be able to eat donuts for Hanukkah, then maybe he can take us off to a safari somewhere. Not today. Unfortunately, it seems that we don't have time now to go to the.
So tomorrow we do Hanukkah.
Next week in Mitzvah Hashem we're going to do Hanukkah. Tomorrow in Mitzvah Hashem I'm going to try and find something to discuss that's Shabbos related. I apologise. I've been very, very.
Eruv. You talking about Eruv?
We spoke about the Eruv, yeah. Thank you for not remembering that. Thank you.
Shabbos nap. You talked about Shabbos nap.
Shabbos nap. I don't have to talk about a Shabbos nap because one of the things that people seem to be doing regularly over here is experiencing that Shabbos nap moment.
Trying the hardest.
It's but there you go.